Welcome back, everyone. It's actually been a long break since before Pesach, but it's great to be back to doing Ramban ala Parsha, and especially on today, Yom HaAtzmaut, to do a Ramban that is significant to the Parsha, obviously, but also significant to our understanding of Eretz Yisrael and what God means when He gives us a homeland and how we look at that and how we value that. I want to do both of those in one and only one Ramban today. We'll be a little faster than usual, but hopefully it'll be worth it. So the Torah starts, as it does in many places in Parshas Metzora and Tazria Metzora. The pasuk says, "V'habeged ki yevo negat tzaras beveged semra o beveged pishtim." So a beged has negat tzaras. Obviously, much of Tazria Metzora deals with negaim, and particularly with Metzora and tzaras. And there are three types of tzaras, obviously. There's tzaras haguf, right? I have it on my body. There's tzaras habeged, I have it on my clothing. And there's tzaras habayis, I have it in my house or on my house. Okay? Now, if I asked myself, how do you translate tzaras? So most of us, but mostly for lack of a better word, would say leprosy. And as it happens, I've never met a leper. I don't really know what it looks like. But I know from this Ramban that would be an imprecise and maybe an incorrect translation of tzaras. Says the Ramban, Pasuk Yud Parak Yud Gimel Pasuk Mem Zayin, and he starts with a bombshell. Ze einenu b'teva klal v'lo hoveh ba'olam. Says the Ramban, there is no such thing in nature as tzaras habeged. Right? There's no such thing. That's the pasuk we're talking about. V'habeged ki yebo negat tzaras. Says the Ramban, Ze einenu b'teva klal v'lo hoveh ba'olam. It is not a natural disease, and it's not something that people come across. So those are two separate statements. So first of all, if it's not a natural disease, what is it? So first the Ramban, to finish the point, says, V'chein nigei habatim. Houses, tzaras habayis. Also, it's not natural. So what is it? Well, I suppose if it's not natural, it's what we would call a miracle. But what would be the miracle? And normally we think of miracles as being positive things. These are great things that God does for us. How could having tzaras habeged or having tzaras habayis, how could that be a great thing for us? So says the Ramban, Aval, Bihiyot Yisrael Shalemim Lashem, when the Jewish people are good, when they are Shalem Lashem, when they're complete in their worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when they're frum, when life is good, Yihiyeh Ruach Hashem Alehem Tamid, the Spirit of God is on them all the time. That's when the Ramban wants to describe, a great world. He talks about he sees us as being Merkava Lashchina. So the result then is, right, we are Ruach Hashem Alehem Tamid, Leha'amid Gufam Ubigdehem Ubatehem B'Mareh Tov. When we're good, says the Ramban, God is good to us. And that means, I'm over-exaggerating or oversimplifying a little bit, it means people don't get sick. And their clothing doesn't get sick, and their homes don't get sick. Meaning when you see a person, and maybe in our experience it's kind of true, when you see a person who's an Oved Hashem, and is a really good person, okay, so you expect him to be a normal person. He doesn't have skin blotches, he doesn't have horrible things growing on his body, he doesn't have horrible things growing on his clothing, and his home is neat and clean. Now, says the Ramban, V'ka'asher yikra be'echad mehem chet va'avon. But when one of the Jewish people sins in some way or does something that God doesn't approve of, right? It's a crisis, kind of. Yithaveh ki'ur bibisaro o bibigdo o bibeito leharod ki Hashem sar me'alav. It's really a great line. Says the Ramban, well, I'm doing all the right things. and then I do something wrong. And then God takes away normally we would say his hashgacha, his divine providence. But the Spirit of God is no longer on this person. As a result of which, he gets tzaras haguf, tzaras habayis, or tzaras habeged. Now, what's the miracle? So here's what I think. The miracle is that you live in a society and you live in a world that's so good that God gives you a warning. Right? Sometimes in our own lives, you do something wrong and you feel guilty and you wonder, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu going to punish you for it? How angry is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Imagine you live in a world where, okay, it's a bad thing. You come home and you have tzaraat habayit. My instinct is you immediately understand why your walls are turning colors, right? You have tzaraat habeged. You immediately understand, that was a wrong thing to do. And if for some reason you get tzaras and you don't immediately understand it, then yefashfesh b'ma'asav. Then the Ramban would say, you need to ask yourself, right? You can't say, well, it's natural. There was moisture in the air and therefore I got tzaras habayis. Or there was a problem in my closet and I left a shirt there for a long time and it got tzaras. The Ramban says, no, it doesn't work that way. Tzaras is a miracle. So what's the miracle? The miracle is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about you so much that he gives you a warning. Because when you come home and you see the tzaras, you know that God is unhappy with you. And then, unlike other situations, it's your job to figure out what you did wrong. Normally that's something that we're afraid to do. And we're afraid to do it for good reason. Because to paskin, that family died in a crash because their mezuzahs were a puzzle and never got them checked. I remember Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal, whose yard said it was this week, it completely offended him when people talk that way. Like you could figure out God's machshava. You could figure out God's motivation. You can't. But when you get tzaras yourself, when you pick out a shirt and has tzaras on it, you have to ask yourself, what did I do that God gave me tzaras? God is warning me right now. It's not makos, it's not kares, it's not misa, it's not one of the punishments of Bezdin, God forbid. You're not being punished that way. But God is telling you, you're no longer who you used to be. You've done something wrong and you need to do tshuva for it. Let's continue in the Ramban. Ulekach amar katuv, right? The Ramban is medayik in the lashon of the pasuk. V'natati negat tzaraat beveit eretz achuzatchem. I'm going to do it beveit eretz achuzatchem. How do you get tzaras? V'natati negat tzaras. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to give it to you. It's not a result of some, a coincidence, a natural coincidence. It's not a result of moisture in the air. It's a result of God doing it. Kihi makat Hashem babayitahu. It's literally God is smiting that house or that beged because somebody did something wrong. Now, next bombshell. This we kind of know, but the Ramban identifies it, and here we come to Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I want to say the Ramban was a great Zionist, but that would be unfair for any number of reasons, including the fact that the Ramban never knew what the word Zionism was or is, and there was no such movement then. The Ramban was a great lover of Eretz Yisrael and of living in Eretz Yisrael, and the Ramban had a philosophy of the qualitative difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. And here he says, V'hinei einenu noheg ela ba'aretz shehi nachalat Hashem. First thing you should know, says the Ramban, tzaras habayis, tzaras habeged, only happens in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Shehi nachalat Hashem. The Ramban has a theory, which we've touched on before, but we'll touch on again now because it's significant. The Ramban obviously recognized that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the whole world and runs the whole world. But the Ramban thinks that God delegated, direct responsibility for Chutz La'aretz to malachim. So there's the malach of the United States, or maybe there's 50 malachim of the United States. I'm not sure they're doing their job right now. There are all these different malachim. There's the malach of Spain and malach of France. Now, God could, of course, overrule them, but God lets them handle things in the ordinary course. But not so in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, says the Ramban, is the Nachalat Hashem. Eretz Yisrael is a place where God takes kiviyachol, a personal interest. There is more hashgacha pratis in Eretz Yisrael than there is in Chutz La'aretz. I'm not, God forbid, saying that there's no hashgacha pratis in Chutz La'aretz, but the Ramban makes clear, God, I want to be careful how he says, God cares about you more simply because you live in Yerushalayim, or you live in Tel Aviv, or you live in Haifa, or you live in Gush Etzion. It makes you automatically more important, right? Maybe not as important as Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, maybe not as important as Moshe Rabbeinu, but your level of hashgacha pratis is a personal one. Now, I suppose the result of the negative in that is also the case. If you do something wrong, it offends HaKadosh Baruch Hu more in Eretz Yisrael than it does in Chutz La'aretz. And so God warns you. God sends you tzaraat so that you'll know you've done something wrong and you need to do tshuva. But that only happens in Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael is Nachalat Hashem, right? You can say it in any number of ways. The Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is higher. But the Ramban thinks the hashgacha pratis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the land of Israel is much higher than it is elsewhere. Not surprisingly then, if I do something wrong here, okay, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to fire a warning shot across my bow, whatever the expression is. God's going to warn me because it offends him more, because this is his land, literally his land. Okay. Ubetod kohanim darshu od shein habayit mitamei ela achar kibush v'chiluk. Next thing, the idea that you came into Eretz Yisrael so nigei batim apply immediately is not true, right? The Medrash Halacha says it took 7 years to conquer Eretz Yisrael and 7 years to split up Eretz Yisrael amongst the Shvatim, and so for those first 14 years it didn't apply. So why would that be? So the answer is it makes complete sense. Until you're home, until you're established, until you are where you're going to live and your neighbors are who they're going to be, you haven't fallen into a rhythm, right? Your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not what it's going to be. However, after Sheva Shekavshu and Sheva Shechilku, this is the future. This is who you are, and this is who you're going to be. And so if you sin then, that's really bad. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to give you tzaraat to try to warn you so that you could do tshuva. V'shiyehei kol echad ve'echad makir et shelo. Right, the whole phrase is she'ein habayit mitamei el achar kibush v'chiluk v'shiyehei kol echad ve'echad makir et shelo. I know my neighbors. I know what shul I daven in. I know what my future is going to be. Therefore, I have to be very careful. Now, v'hatam. What's the reason for this? Ki az nit yashva da'atam aleihem ladat et Hashem. After Sheva Shekavshu and Sheva Shechilku, that's when Bnei Yisrael were able to relax and think about who they are and think about what their lives are going to be and think primarily about what their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. V'tishrei Shechina b'tocham. Only then, right? Now, again, it's hundreds of years from Sheva Shekavshu and Sheva Shechilku till the Beis HaMikdash comes, till David HaMelech builds the Beis HaMikdash. But nevertheless, says the Ramban, there's a transition period where I'm not yet completely comfortable with where I'm living and with who my neighbors are, and I'm in transition. So nigaim, tzaraat doesn't apply during that period. But 14 years later, I'm now settled in my nachala, in the home that God's granting me, and I recognize what my life is, and therefore I'm more responsible for my actions. And so this is true with respect to nigei batim. And then the Ramban speculates, but it's also what he believes. V'chein ani choshev b'nega habegadim shelo yinhagu ela ba'aretz. Right? Of course, nigei habayis only apply in Eretz Yisrael, but says the Ramban, I also think that nigei begadim only apply in Eretz Yisrael as well. So why doesn't it say it specifically in the pasuk? Right? Our pasuk says va'beged ki bonega tzaraat beveit eretz achuz aschem. So why does it say that about nigei begadim? So says the Ramban, it makes complete sense. V'lo hutzrach lema'et mehen chutz la'aretz, ki lo yaru sham le'olam. Says the Ramban, no one ever came across tzaraat habeged in chutz la'aretz. The Torah doesn't have to say tzaraat habeged in chutz la'aretz doesn't apply, because it's never going to happen. It doesn't happen. Nigei batim could have. There could be something on your wall because of the moisture in chutz la'aretz, and you say to yourself, wow, I wonder if this is a nega or not. So the Ramban says, no, it's not, because negarim are miraculous, they only happen in Eretz Yisrael. And I think that's also the case with respect to nigei begadim. Why? So the Ramban says, but don't worry about that. The Torah doesn't have to tell us that, because no one ever opened their closet in chutz la'aretz and saw a nega on their beged. It just never happens. Okay, so that's one reason. Says the Ramban, similarly, od eino hagim ela bibigadim levanim v'lo bitzvuim. Nigei begadim only apply to white clothing. They don't apply to colored clothing. Why? Ki ulai hatzeva hotzi hakiur hahu b'makom hahu kitivo. Maybe the dye ran, right? Begadim don't get colored on their own. They get colored because they're colored, because they're dyed. So says the Ramban, they're never ever going to be tameh, because you'll never know that it happened because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it didn't happen because the dye ran. And then he has a great line, right? You won't know that it happened because of the dye. V'lo etzba elokimhi. Right? What is tzaraat? Tzaraat, says the Ramban, is etzba elokimhi. It's miraculous. It's like in Mitzrayim, where the Chaytumim had to admit, with respect to the Kinim, they couldn't do it. Etzba elokimhi. Right? This is God's action. Says the Ramban, tzaraat is a miracle, the same as Kinim, the same as the Eser Makos. It's exactly the same. Ulefikach hatzvuyim bidei shamayim mitamin kidir Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says no. If it's naturally colored, if a garment is naturally colored, I'm not really sure how that would happen. But if it's naturally colored, then it can get tzaraat, because it's not just a dye that could run. Okay? So let's just stop for a second and realize where we are. First of all, the Ramban leaves us in a little bit of doubt with respect to nigei haguf. Right? It sounds like it can apply in chutz la'aretz. Again, I don't know if it does apply in chutz la'aretz. The bigger question would be, why don't we have negaim bizman hazeh? And the answer, sadly, is we're not on the level to have negaim. You need to be on a certain level for God to warn you, right? It's a reward for how good you've been that God sends a nega, that God sends tzaraat habayis or tzaraat habeged to you. But unfortunately, if you live in a world where God is less present and less active, so there is less hashgacha pratis, and God lets things go. And the Ramban would say, the world that we live in now isn't zocha to the miracle of tzaraat. We don't get that warning. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't come to us and say, listen, you need to fix your behavior. And in a way, like, how great would it be if he did? How great would it be if you were embarrassed to go out, or you're embarrassed to have company because you have tzaraat habayis, or you're embarrassed to wear a shirt because anybody would look at it and say, hey, what's wrong with you? And then either they would know, or you would have to admit to them, well, I did something wrong, and clearly God is warning me and God is punishing me, right? The whole feedback from God, the whole back and forth, the whole understanding that God's presence is here every day is something that we're lacking in the world that we live in now. And it's one of the big, big themes in the Ramban. And the point of living in Eretz Yisrael on Yom HaAtzmaut, says the Ramban, or maybe it's the day after by the time you're looking at this, but says the Ramban, it's because Eretz Yisrael has Shechina, and God is living here, and God has hashgacha pratis, and God cares, and therefore God would be more offended. But what a privilege to be able to live in Eretz Yisrael, and what a privilege to be able to live in the state of Israel, and what a privilege to be part of a transition and part of a process that one day will yield the geula. It's a gift that we who live in Israel have. And it's a gift that everybody should imagine for themselves. Let's just finish the Ramban. V'al derech hapshat mipnei zeh, the simple pshat, yachziru hakatuv b'chol pasuk upasuk, habeged o haor o hashti o ha'erev. In every single pasuk, it doesn't say v'habegadim, it says this type of beged and this and that type of beged, and the shati and erev is the whoop and wharf. Apparently, that's how you make, how you weave or something like that, right? Why does it have to say each of these things every time? Ki hadavar nes, because it's miraculous, and you wouldn't be able to just say the halacha. Well, if it applies to this, it applies to that. The Torah has to go out of its way to say over and over again each of the different begadim and each of the different elements that it applies to. So in the end, now one last thing. If we've learned a lot of Rambans together, one of the things we know from the famous Ramban at the end of Bo is that Ein ba'olam teva klal. The Ramban, he says it, I don't know if he really means it, but he says there's no such thing as nature, meaning when the sun comes up tomorrow morning, it's going to be a miracle. And when the sun sets tonight, it's going to be a miracle. All the things that happen in nature that we think are natural are really miracles. They just happen every day. And as a result, we take them for granted. Says the Ramban, the idea that if you sin, va'atzarat hashamayim v'lo yeh matar, what does sinning have to do with God withholding rain? It's not natural, right? And if we're good and we obey HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then v'natati mitayar tzechem be'ito. Says the Ramban, those things are miracles also. We're just so used to them that we take them for granted. So it's not such a chiddush that the Ramban says tzaraat is a miracle also. But interestingly, the bigger chiddush is when he says that tzaraat only applies in Eretz Yisrael, because that's the makom hashrat hashchina, and that's where we have a closer relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as a result, that's where we're zocha to the miracle of a warning from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yi ratzon, that on this Yom HaAtzmaut, we feel a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we feel a connection with the land of Israel, we feel a connection with the state of Israel, and we're zocha to have that kind of relationship where if we do something wrong, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us a warning in the form of tzaraat. Yashkoach, Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.